alle zusammen.
Okay, let's open.
Lass uns mit Gebet öffnen.
Lieber himmlischer Vater,
Der himmlische Vater,
ich möchte dir danken, Herr, dass du uns heute Morgen hier zusammenrufst.
I want to thank you that you gathered us together this morning.
Und Herr, bitte hilf uns, dass wir geistig und körperlich anwesend sind.
And please help us to be literal and spiritual attendant.
Dass wir es nicht zulassen, dass uns Gedanken ablenken von deinem Wort, Herr.
That thoughts cannot distract us.
Herr, bitte segne Bruder Mark und Schwester Daniela
Please bless Brother Mark and Sister Daniela.
und alle, die beim Livestream dabei sind, Herr.
And everyone who watches the live stream.
Hilf allen, dass sie dein Wort aufnehmen können und Überführung erfahren.
And please help everyone to receive your word and to get conviction.
Ich danke dir in Jesu Namen.
And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, the notes are posted in the live stream, actually.
Also die Notizen sind im Livestream gepostet.
If you turn in your Bibles, because on those notes they're just quotes, but go in your Bibles to Matthew 22.
Und wenn wir jetzt in unseren Bibeln zu Matthäus 22 gehen.
And Matthew 22 is an illustration of the end of the world.
Und Matthäus 22 ist ja eine Darstellung vom Ende der Welt.
Okay, and we understand that 1989 really is where we come to the end of the world, right? It's the time of the end that's marked in Bible prophecy.
Und wir verstehen ja, dass 1989 wirklich der Zeitpunkt ist, wo wir zum Ende der Welt kommen. Also es ist als die Zeit des Endes eben markiert in der Zeitprophetie.
And it's marked by a time where the Lord begins to raise up a movement. Right?
Und es markiert eben die Zeit, wo der Herr anfängt, eine Bewegung aufzurichten.
Okay, so, and you see that here in Matthew 22.
Und wir sehen das hier in Matthäus 22.
It says, And Jesus answered and spake unto them again by parables, and said, The kingdom of heaven is like unto a certain king which made a marriage for his son, and sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding, and they would not come. Okay, so, and in fact, let's read through and then we will come back to this. It's in
Wir
verse
lesen
4.
weiter. Vers 4.
Again, so a second time,
Also nochmal, ein zweites Mal.
he sent forth other servants, saying, Tell them which are bidden, Behold, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen, my fatlings are killed, and all things are ready coming to the marriage. But they made light of it, and went their ways, one to his farm, another to his merchandise, and the remnant took his servants, and entreated them spitefully, and slew them. But when the king heard thereof, he was wroth, and he sent forth his armies, and destroyed those murderers, and burned up their city. Then saith he to his servants, The wedding is ready, but they which were bidden were not worthy. Go ye therefore into the highways, and as many as ye shall find, bid to the marriage. So the servants went out into the highways, and gathered together all as many as they found, both bad and good, and the wedding was furnished. And when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. So, we went through this, right, in the last couple of days.
Also wir sind in den letzten Tagen da durchgegangen.
And what you see in here is 3 times the call goes out, right?
Und was wir hier sehen, ist, dass 3-mal dieser Ruf ausgeht.
And the king comes in marking the final review where everything's done and he comes in and you know, he's asked these hard questions.
Und wenn der König dann eben reinkommt, dann markiert das eben ja, diese finale Untersuchung und alles ist eben schon vorbei und kommt herein und fragt dann diese Fragen.
And this is in agreement with the reform lines that we have here on the board.
Und das ist in Übereinstimmung mit den Reformlinien, die wir hier auf der Tafel
Okay,
haben.
so we know through the reform lines that you have, first of all, the movement, followed by the church, and lastly, finishing off with the world, right?
Und wir wissen von den Reformlinien, also wir haben hier die Bewegung, dann die Gemeinde und dann zuletzt eben die Welt.
So, first call goes out to the first group. They don't come.
Also der erste Ruf geht an diese erste Gruppe eben voraus, also sie kommen nicht.
Okay, call goes out to the next group. They don't come.
Und dann geht der Ruf zur nächsten Gruppe und sie kommen nicht.
And after the second group in the parable, what's marked there?
Und nach der zweiten Gruppe im Gleichnis, was ist da markiert?
The destruction of Babylon, right?
Also die Zerstörung von Babylon.
And the destruction of Jerusalem, and Babylon, but Jerusalem, that's correct.
Also die Zerstörung von Jerusalem, auch Babylon, aber Jerusalem.
Okay, so the point is that the destruction of Jerusalem is a result of the Sunday law crisis and rejecting Christ, right?
Und die Zerstörung von Jerusalem ist eben das Resultat von der Sonntagsgesetzkrise, dass man eben Christus verworfen hat.
And the destruction of Jerusalem, as history was marking, where God's church had rejected him, and hence this is the line for the church. And here's where all those that have rejected Christ get punished in the destruction of Jerusalem.
Und die Geschichte markiert es ja auch, dass Gottes Gemeinde eben ihn verworfen hat. Und deswegen ist es auch hier, also die Gemeinde verwirft ihn und deswegen kommt die Zerstörung über sie.
Okay, so the last call goes out to the last group of people, brings you to the final review where the king comes in to see the guests, right?
Und der letzte Ruf geht dann an diese letzte Gruppe. Das führt dich dann dazu, dass eben dann der König hereinkommt und die Gäste betrachtet.
So, and when you understand that the reform lines are basically taking all the stories of the Bible and breaking it down for us so that we can understand the Lord, how he deals with us, right?
Und wir können dann praktisch eben verstehen, dass die Reformlinien, sie nehmen eben Gottes Wort und brechen das eben für uns herab, sodass wir das verstehen können.
Okay, so now many things we have to think about here, but the point is I want to make when you come to what it does here, these three groups, it shows us that every time a group has rejected Christ, there is a point where the king will come in and inspect to see who's going to go forward and who's not going to go forward, right?
Und was uns eben diese drei Gruppen zeigen, ist eben, dass wann immer eben ein Volk Gott eben verwirft, oder dann kommt eben dann der Herr eben herein und betrachtet dann eben die Gäste und wer eben gerecht ist und wer nicht.
Okay, so at the end here, right? King comes in. Same here. King comes in. Excuse me. King comes in, right?
Also hier haben wir dann diesen König, der hereinkommt und hier auch.
Right? So whoever has got on, whoever Christ has given the wedding garment to, right, is now sent here, right?
Und zu wem auch immer Christus eben hier das Hochzeitsgewand gegeben hat, der ist dann eben gesandt hier.
Right? So it shows you that the first group, somebody had to be sent here, right?
Also es zeigt uns, dass auch in der ersten Gruppe jemand auch hier gesandt werden musste.
Okay, so and this is where we come back to our types, right?
Und das ist, wo wir auf unsere Typen zurückkommen.
Right? Because 9/11, we know, was just a type, right?
Denn wir wissen, der 11. September war nur ein Typus.
But everybody see the point that I'm making at the moment, right?
Aber versteht jeder den Punkt, den ich mache?
Yeah, yes? Okay, it's all based upon principle, right?
Also das ist alles basierend auf Prinzipien.
Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go back to, in fact, let's just go to Matthew 24.
Und wir gehen jetzt zu Matthäus 24.
Because in the middle here, in between the times of trouble, you have this little time of peace.
Und jeweils in der Mitte, immer zwischen den Zeiten der Trübsal, haben wir diese kleine Zeit des Friedens.
Okay, so I want to go back to this now, and I want to look at this structure very closely, because we have to be able to understand why things are laid out this way, and what's the principles, and what's the evidences for showing that.
Und ich möchte eben darauf zurückkommen, möchte, dass wir uns das näher anschauen, diese Struktur, dass wir eben verstehen, warum das so ist und die Prinzipien und die Beweise dazu.
Okay, so we have to go through all the stories of the Bible and allow them to teach us and put things in place on the structure here, right?
Also wir müssen zurück zu all den Geschichten der Bibel und eben erlauben, dass sie uns lehren und diese Struktur eben hinsetzen.
Okay, we've got to prove all things and hold fast that which is good, right?
Und wir müssen ja alle Dinge prüfen und das Gute behalten.
Okay, so let's go to Matthew 24
Also wir gehen jetzt zu Matthäus 24
and verse 3.
in Vers 3.
It says, "And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? And Jesus answered and said unto him, Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumours of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines, pestilence, earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall arise, and deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." Right? So from verse 3 to verse 14 is an illustration of the beginning of the time of trouble to when the end comes, right?
Also Vers 3 bis Vers 14 ist eine Darstellung von dem Anfang der Zeit der Trübsal bis zum Ende.
Okay, so in verse 3, right?
Und in Vers 3.
"And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world?" So, if you just go to the book of Mark,
Also wenn wir jetzt
13, same parallel illustration.
zu Markus 13 gehen, das ist
We'll come back to Matthew 24 in a moment.
eine parallele Geschichte.
Verse 1.
Markus 13, Vers 1.
It says, "And as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. And Jesus answering said unto them, Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now, we've read all the quotes, right? What is this referring to?
Also wir haben all diese Zitate schon gelesen und auf was bezieht sich das?
The destruction of the cities, right?
Die Zerstörung der Städte.
So, and we've got lots of quotes that says the destruction of Jerusalem represents the destruction of the world, right?
Und wir haben viele Zitate, die besagen, dass die Zerstörung von Jerusalem die Zerstörung der Welt darstellt.
Okay, and we know, because we've gone through this a lot recently, that in the seventh plague, right at the end of the seventh plague, when Christ comes, is marking when he lays low every city in the world. Every single building gets smashed, right?
Und wir wissen ja, am Ende der 7. Plage, wenn Christus kommt, dann wird eben an diese ganzen Gebäude, jede Stadt eben auf der Welt niedrig gemacht.
Right? Okay, so we need to take these thoughts now, because there's this quote, for instance, 9 Testimonies 11.
Und
Right.
ist ja auch dieses Zitat 9t, Seite 11.
9 Testimonies 11 was pointing the destruction of those buildings in New York was pointing to the point that where they have rejected the Sunday law, and therefore he brings punishment upon them, right?
Und diese Zerstörung der Städte, dieser Gebäude in New York, stellt eben einen Zeitpunkt dar, wo sie in der Sonntagsgesetzkrise, wo sie eben beworfen haben.
Why are you looking confused? Because that's what 9T11 is talking about. It's talking about the Sunday law.
Yes, but you said they rejected the Sunday.
Yes, they reject all the truth about the Sunday law. So they accept Sunday, and the Lord brings punishment upon them, right?
Also sie verwerfen diese Wahrheit über das Sonntagsgesetz und nehmen eben diesen Sonntag an.
Okay, so when we have this here, what does this then do for us? Or should I ask, what is 9/11 a type of?
Und der 11. September, für was ist das ein Typus?
What does it represent? What does it typify?
Also was typifiziert ist und was stellt es dar?
Come on, let's. No, we've already marked as the destruction of the cities, but what?
Also wir haben die Zerstörung der Städte schon markiert, aber was genau?
Which judgment, Margaret? The investigation?
No.
No. So let's be specific. The executive judgment, right?
Also das ausführende Gericht.
So 9/11, right, typifies the executive judgment.
Yes.
Also der 11. September typifiziert das ausführende Gericht.
Okay. Now, the executive judgment takes place when?
Und das ausführende Gericht findet wann statt?
Yes, that's true. But when? I'm asking a specific point in time.
Also ein bestimmter Zeitpunkt.
When Christ comes. This is what the point I'm making. It. The end of the seventh plague is the perfect fulfillment where Christ comes and he executes judgment. Right? Let's go to Jude.
Also wenn Christus kommt und das Ende der 7. Plage stellt es eben perfekt dar, wenn Christus kommt.
Verse 14.
Also wir gehen jetzt zum Buch Judas in Vers 14.
It says, and Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Right? Second coming, when he comes to execute judgment, right?
Also es ist das zweite Kommen, wenn er eben Gericht ausführt.
The symbol here is marked by an angel, mighty angel, coming down from heaven, right?
Und das Symbol ist hier markiert durch einen mächtigen Engel, der vom Himmel herabkommt.
Right? So it's a type, right?
Also es ist ein Typus.
It's a type of the second coming.
Es ist ein Typus für das zweite Kommen.
So we know that when the king comes in, it's also marking what?
Und wir wissen auch, wenn der König hereinkommt, markiert es auch was.
The exact same, right?
Also genau dasselbe.
So that's right here, the executive. Judgment. second coming.
Also das ausführende Gericht und das zweite Kommen.
So, in principle, who comes in here?
Und im Prinzip, wer kommt hier herein?
The king comes in, right?
Der König kommt herein.
Because when he comes in and looks, he has to send somebody who's got a wedding garment on, right?
Denn wenn er eben kommt und sie anblickt, dann möchte er eben jemanden senden mit einem Hochzeitsgewand an.
Because it says the 12 disciples that he sent, what did he do with them?
Und die 12 Jünger, die er gesandt hat, was hat er mit ihnen getan?
He sends them filled with power, right?
Also er hat sie gesandt mit Kraft.
And we know when you take the reform lines, August the 11th, 1840 parallels 9/11, right?
Und wenn wir die Reformlinien nehmen, ist der 11. August 1840 parallel mit dem 11. September.
And she takes August the 11th, 1840 and says that it typifies the last mighty work of the third angel, right?
Und sie nimmt eben den 11. Den 11. August und markiert es eben, setzt es parallel mit diesem letzten mächtigen Werk unter dem dritten Engel.
Right? Okay, so this would mark the last mighty warning of under the third angel when people are sent forth filled with the Holy Spirit, right?
Also das würde diese letzte mächtige Warnung unter dem dritten Engel markieren, wenn Menschen eben gesandt werden mit dem Hochzeitsgewand.
So what it does is, because this point here is this point here,
Und dieser Punkt hier ist ja dieser Punkt,
so you have a parallel, right?
also haben wir eine Parallele.
And this point here is this point here, so you have another parallel, right?
Und dieser Punkt hier ist ja auch dieser Punkt, also wir haben eine weitere Parallele.
So, and what it does is it shows us that every one of these boxes is, when you bring them line upon line together, they're all teaching the same thing, right?
Und es zeigt uns eben, dass jede von diesen Boxen, wenn man sie Linie auf Linie zusammenbringt, es lehrt uns dasselbe.
Because in 1989, who came together?
Und 1989, wer kam da zusammen?
Pope and the United States, right? Which is the power that's going to lead the whole world into the Sunday law, right?
Also der Papst und die Vereinigten Staaten, das ist ja Kraft, die die Welt in das Sonntagsgesetz bringt.
So, Pope and USA, right?
Ja, du hast noch vergessen zu sagen, am 11. September ist es nur das Prinzip, was da erfüllt wird.
Okay, und am 11. September ist es nur das Prinzip, das erfüllt wird.
Okay, so everybody following so far?
Also konnte jeder folgen bisher.
So all we're doing is we're taking the reform lines and then we're taking all these principles out of the Bible and we're putting them in place, because then it teaches us a picture, right?
Und was wir machen, wir nehmen also diese Reformlinien und diese Prinzipien der Bibel, platzieren sie eben hin und dann lehrt es uns eben dieses ganze Bild.
Okay, so go now back to Matthew 24.
Also wir gehen jetzt zurück zu Matthäus 24.
What we're doing is we're like building a jigsaw, right?
Und was wir eben machen, wir bringen dieses Puzzle zusammen.
Matthew 22 confirms this understanding that we have these three groups at the end of the world, right?
Und Matthäus 22 bestätigt eben, dass wir diese drei Gruppen am Ende der Welt haben.
And then these other stories that we've gone to, and you put them on here, they start to put the pieces in place, right?
Und auch die anderen Geschichten, wenn wir sie hierhin platzieren, bringen sie all die Stücke zusammen.
So, when you come back to Matthew 24, right, it's when you go to verse 14,
Und wenn wir zurück zu Matthäus 24, Vers 14 kommen,
it says, "In this gospel the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." Right? So, what I want to put in place is that from the Sunday law, it brings you to the end, right?
also vom Sonntagsgesetz bringt es dich zum Ende.
So it teaches us this, that before the end comes, what must be preached?
Also es lehrt uns, dass bevor das Ende kommt, was muss gepredigt werden.
Not just a warning, but specifically. Yes, it says, the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world.
Yes.
Also
It's-
es
so
sagt,
it's-
dass ein,
Everybody's got to be warned before the end comes, right?
also es sagt,
Worldwide
das
message.
Evangelium vom Reich soll in die ganze Welt verkündigt werden.
What I want to put in place, it's a last warning, right?
Und das ist eben diese letzte Warnung.
Right, so we'll come back to that in a moment. So, in one sense, when you get here, he sends the people to give the last warning, right?
Also in einem Sinne, wenn man hier hinkommt, sendet er ein Volk, was die letzte Warnung gibt.
But before the end comes, there's a last warning given,
Aber auch bevor das Ende kommt, wird eine letzte Warnung gegeben.
right? Okay, so this is what we're doing, right? We're placing things on, we're not using our own wisdom, we're just letting the Bible teach us, right?
Und das ist eben, was wir tun. Also wir platzieren die Sachen auf den Linien. Wir
Because,
sollen nicht unsere eigene Weisheit verwenden, sondern das, was das Wort sagt.
because this is just a type, right?
Und das ist ja nur ein Typus.
But it's going to give us a pattern that's going to be repeated as we go down through, right?
Aber es wird uns ein Muster geben, was sich wiederholen wird, währenddessen wir eben weiter da durchgehen.
Okay, right, now go to the first quote that I've put in the notes.
Also jetzt gehen wir zum ersten Zitat. In den-
Probably take us a few days to get through all this stuff here. It begins, it says, we have no time to lose. Troublous times are before us. The world is stirred with the spirit of war. What's the world stirred with?
Also mit was ist die
The
Welt
spirit of
aufgewühlt?
war, right?
Der Geist des Krieges.
Soon the scenes of trouble spoken of in the prophecies will take place. The prophecy in the 11th of Daniel has nearly reached its complete fulfillment. Much of the history that has taken place in fulfillment of this prophecy will be repeated. So she's telling us here that Daniel, the book of Daniel, right, is nearly complete, right?
Also sie sagt uns hier, dass das Buch Daniel,
Daniel 11, that is.
also Daniel 11, die vollständige Füllung fast erreicht hat.
And she says that it's nearly completing any time when the world is stirred with the spirit of war, right?
Und sie sagt eben, es ist fast eben erreicht, diese Erfüllung, wenn eben diese Welt aufgewühlt ist mit dem Geist des Krieges.
And much of the history that has taken place in fulfillment of this prophecy will be repeated.
Und vieles, das was eben schon sich erfüllt hat von dieser Geschichte, das wird sich wiederholen.
So they're in a time period where there's war. It's going to bring you to the end of Daniel 11, and then she says, much of that that's happened is going to be repeated, right?
Also da ist diese Zeit des Krieges und Daniel 11, es bringt dich dann eben bis zum Ende und dann sagt es eben, dass sich vieles von dem wiederholen wird.
It says in the 30th verse, a power is spoken of that shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. And then she quotes verses 31 to 36.
Sie zitiert dann Vers 31 bis 36.
Scenes similar to those described in these words will take place. We see evidence that Satan is fast obtaining the control of human minds who have not the fear of God before them. Let all read and understand the prophecies of this book, for we are now entering upon the time of trouble spoken of in Daniel 12, 1 to 4. So based upon what we've looked at this morning, where would we place Daniel 12, 1 to 4?
Also basierend dem, was wir uns heute Morgen schon angeschaut haben, wo würden wir Daniel 12, Vers 1 bis 4 markieren?
Yes, this is true. This is true, but we'll look at that closer as we go. Okay, and yes, it's the point where it's the close of probation, where Michael stands up, says it is done, right?
Also es ist der Schluss der Gnadenzeit, wo Michael aufsteht und sagt, es ist getan.
Okay, I don't want to go into those thoughts more. But the point I want to make is that prior to that happening, it's talking about a time of trouble where Daniel 11 is going to lead down to be completed, right?
Aber bevor eben das passiert, spricht es von einer Zeit der Trübsal und Daniel 11 führt dann eben zum Ende davon.
And then when it comes to that, then it's going to be repeated, right?
Und wenn es dann zu diesem Ende kommt, dann wird es wiederholt.
And the time spoken about there, verses, just go to Daniel 11, just remind ourselves, Daniel 11, 31.
Und wir gehen jetzt auch zu Daniel 11, Vers 31.
It says, an arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary strength, they shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. This is the beginning of the 1260, right?
Also das ist der Anfang der 1260.
And that, we can see, is marked by this point right here, right?
Und das können wir sehen, ist durch diesen Punkt hier markiert.
So here you have the 1260. It's where the civil power puts the papacy on the throne and he rules for a time, right?
Also hier haben wir diese 1260, wo die zivile Macht das Papsttum eben auf den Thron setzt und es herrscht dann für diese Zeit.
We all understand it. We're not teaching anything here, we're just reminding ourselves, right?
Und das versteht ja, denke ich, jeder.
So when you come to the end here, right, those verses or that experience is going to be repeated, right?
Und wenn man dann also zum Ende von dem kommt, dann werden diese Verse oder diese Erfahrung wird sich wiederholen.
Okay. So, okay. So what it does for us is it tells us that the 1260, its perfect fulfillment is speaking about the 7 last plagues, right?
Also es sagt uns, dass die 1260 ihre perfekte Erfüllung in den 7 letzten Plagen hat.
So 9/11, when this buildings come down, it's marking in one sense the end of the 7 last plagues, but in another sense it's marking the destruction that's going to come upon the world for rejecting the Sabbath, right, or partaking in the Sunday law crisis.
Der 11. September markiert eben einerseits dieses Ende der 7 letzten Plagen, aber andererseits auch diese Bestrafung, die über die Welt kommt in der Sonntagsgesetzkrise.
Okay, so why does it represent the end of the Sunday law?
Und warum markiert es auch das Ende der Sonntagsgesetzkrise?
Okay.
Das ist, glaube ich, umgedreht gesagt. Es markiert das Ende des Sonntagsgesetzes da. Und markiert aber auch sozusagen den Anfang dann der Bestrafung über die Welt in den 7 letzten Plagen.
Okay. At the beginning of the 7 plagues.
It's both, that's what I'm saying. In one sense it represents the end of the 7 plagues, in another sense it represents the punishment that comes at the end of the Sunday law.
Also in einem Sinne markiert es das Ende der 7 letzten Plagen und in einem anderen eben das Ende von der Sonntagsgesetzkrise. Also
Okay, let's go to the next quote.
kein Problem.
Go to the next quote.
Also wir gehen zum nächsten Zitat.
It is no time now for God's people to be fixing their affections or laying up their treasure in the world. The time is not far distant when, like the early disciples, we shall be forced to seek a refuge in desolate and solitary places. As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was a signal for flight to the Judean Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation and the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning to us. It will then be time to leave the large cities preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes and secluded places in the mountains. Okay, so now maybe I didn't put this quote in, but this quote here, what's it talking about?
Also dieses Zitat hier, über was spricht es?
What point in time is it referring to?
Auf welchen Zeitpunkt bezieht es sich?
Sunday law.
Okay, so how do we see that there?
Also auf das Sonntagsgesetz und wie können wir das sehen?
Siege of Jerusalem.
Right, so where do we find this marked in the Bible?
Also die Belagerung von Jerusalem, wo sehen wir das?
Okay, where, Margaret?
In 24.
Yeah, Matthew 24 is a big chapter.
50.
Okay, in verse 15, right?
Also in Matthäus 24, Vers 15.
Let's go there.
Wir gehen dahin.
Okay, so Matthew 24, verse 15. It says, When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. So where do we find that? Where do we find that in the Bible, apart from, obviously, here in Matthew 24?
Also, wo finden wir das in der Bibel noch, außer Matthäus 24?
Where in Daniel, Margaret? Yeah.
Also,
The verses that we just read, right?
Daniel 11, also die Verse, die wir gelesen haben.
No, not 38. 31, that we just read.
Yes.
Vers 31.
Right? So the quote before, so when you go back to the quote before, it says verses 31 to 36 are going to repeat in the 7 last plagues, right?
Und wenn man zu dem Zitat zuvor geht, dann sagt es eben, dass Vers 31 bis 36 sich wiederholen wird in den 7 letzten Plagen.
But it also says that they are fulfilling at this time of trouble, right?
Also sie sagen auch, dass sie sich eben erfüllen in dieser Zeit der Trübsal.
So, hence when we go to the next quote from 5t that we just read,
Und wenn wir jetzt deswegen zum nächsten Zitat gehen, also was wir eben gelesen haben,
Lawrence says that it's talking about the Sunday law, right?
da hat der Bruder Lorenz gesagt, dass es über das Sonntagsgesetz spricht.
In the second sentence it says, As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was the signal for flight to the Judean Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation and the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning to us. It will then be time to leave the large cities, preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes and secluded place among the mountains. So when we read Matthew 24, verse 15,
Also das war jetzt der 3. Satz. Und wenn wir Matthäus 24, Vers 15 lesen,
When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So this is the sign when you have to flee, right?
also bis Vers 16, also das ist dieses Zeichen, wo du dann fliehen musst.
And just keep your place there, go to Luke 21,
Und wenn wir jetzt zu Lukas 21 gehen,
because Luke 21 better illustrates what we've just read in this quote.
denn Lukas 21 stellt es eben besser dar als dieses Zitat, das wir gelesen haben.
Because this is what happened in history.
Denn das ist das, was in der Geschichte passiert ist.
It says, verse 20,
Vers 20.
And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. So, Jerusalem compassed with armies, right, was the sign. That's what we read here in this quote. As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was the signal for the flight of the Judean Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation and the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath. So it's telling us that Luke 21:20 is marking the Sunday law, right?
Also es sagt in Vers 20, spricht es von dieser Belagerung durch Kriegsheere von Jerusalem. Das haben wir eben auch in dem Zitat gelesen, also diese römischen Heere, die das umlagert haben.
Okay, so when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains. Same point in time as we were at in Matthew 24, right?
Vers 21, also das ist derselbe Zeitpunkt so wie in Matthäus 24.
Okay, so go back to Matthew 24.
Und wir gehen jetzt zurück zu Matthäus 24.
Okay, so the surrounding of Jerusalem was done by Cestius,
Und diese Belagerung von Jerusalem wurde ja durch Cestius gemacht.
and it takes you down to the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus, right?
Und das bringt dich eben zur Zerstörung von Jerusalem durch Titus.
So you have Cestius to Titus, right?
Also wir haben Cestius bis Titus.
And how long was that?
Und für wie lange war das?
3.5 years, right?
3,5 Jahre.
Which is 1260, right?
Was auch wie 1260 ist.
So Christ takes the history of the papacy from 538 to 1798, parallels it with pagan Rome, with the destruction of Jerusalem from Cestius to Titus, right?
Und Christus nimmt eben diese 1260 von 538 bis 1798, setzt es eben parallel mit dieser Belagerung von Jerusalem durch, also von Cestius bis Titus.
And Sister White says the destruction of Jerusalem is the marking the destruction at the end of the world, right?
Und Schwester Wald sagt eben, dass diese Zerstörung von Jerusalem markiert die Zerstörung am Ende der Welt.
But the quote prior says that 1260, right, that's illustrated in Daniel is going to repeat in the 7 last plagues, right?
Aber das Zitat zuvor hat uns gesagt, dass diese 1260, von der eben gesprochen ist in Daniel 11, die wird sich wiederholen in den 7 letzten Plagen.
Okay, so that we know that this typifies the 7 last plagues, right?
Und wir wissen ja, das typifiziert die 7 letzten Plagen.
Okay, so we can do this, right? We can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? We've spent a lot of time looking at the 7th plague recently, right?
Und wir haben uns ja in letzter Zeit viel diese 7. Plage angeschaut.
Okay, which would be marking this point, marked by the 10, right?
Und die wäre eben markiert durch die 10.
Okay, so you have this 10 on every level given to us by the Millerite one, right?
Also wir haben dann diese 10 jedem Level gegeben und die ist uns durch die Milleritenlinie gegeben.
In Millerite history, just before August 11th, 1840, the 10 there, what was given?
Und in Geschichte über den Milleriten, also vor dem 11. August 1840 oder 10, was wurde da gegeben?
It was a last warning message, right?
Das ist eine Vorhersage und es war eine letzte Warnungsbotschaft.
Okay, so when you read Matthew 24 and it says, "This gospel of the kingdom shall go to all the world, and then shall the end come," right?
Und in Matthäus 24 konnten wir lesen, dass das Evangelium zuerst noch in die ganze Welt gehen muss und dann kommt das Ende.
Right? It's marking by a prediction. This prediction is going to be given, right? And it's predicting the end of the world, right?
Und das markiert eben eine Vorhersage, die gegeben wird und das Ende der Welt eben voraussagt.
Right? Okay. So, okay, many things going through my mind, but I want to deal with one thing at a time, right? So, now go to the next quote.
Wir gehen jetzt zum 3. Zitat.
December 16th, 1848. The Lord gave me a view of the shaking of the powers of the heavens. I saw that when the Lord said heaven, in giving the signs recorded by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he meant heaven. And when he said earth, he meant earth. The powers of heaven are the sun, moon, and stars. They rule in the heavens. The powers of earth are those that rule on the earth. The powers of heaven will be shaken at the voice of God. Then the sun, the moon, and the stars will be moved out of their places. They will not pass away, but be shaken by the voice of God. Okay, so there's a shaking of the earth and a shaking of the heavens and the earth, right?
Also da ist eine Erschütterung der Erde und eine Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde.
And how is the heaven shaken?
Und wie wird der Himmel erschüttert?
By the voice of God, right?
Durch die Stimme Gottes.
It says, dark heavy clouds came up and clashed against each other. The atmosphere parted and rolled back. Then we could look up through the open space in Orion, whence came the voice of God. The holy city will come down through that open space. So, why is there an open space there?
Also warum ist da dieser offene Raum?
Okay, the heavens are opened, right?
Weil die Himmel ja geöffnet
The
sind.
clouds are peeled back, right?
Diese Wolken sind geteilt.
And this is where the voice of God comes from.
Und das ist von wo eben diese Stimme Gottes kommt.
It says, the holy city will come down through that open space. I saw that the powers of the earth are now being shaken, and that events come in order. Wars and rumours of war, sword, famine, and pestilence are the first to shake the powers of the earth. Then the voice of God will shake the sun, moon, and stars, and this earth also. I saw that the shaking of the powers in Europe is not, as some teach, the shaking of the powers of heaven, but as the shaking of the angry nations. Right? So, 1848. What happened in 1848?
Und was ist passiert 1848?
Same as what was typified in 1989, right?
Dasselbe, was auch typifiziert wurde 1989.
Okay. King of France takes all the other kings together. They want to put the Pope back on the throne, right?
Der König von Frankreich hat eben all diese anderen Könige zusammengebracht und sie wollten den Papst auf den Thron bringen.
And Sister White's rebuking them for saying it's the shaking of the heavens. She's saying it's not the shaking of the heavens, it's the shaking of the earth, right?
Und Schwester White scheltet dann eben diese Menschen, das sagen, das ist die Erschütterung der Himmel. Und sie sagt eben, das ist die Erschütterung der Erde.
And the shaking of the earth is what's marked in Matthew, Mark and Luke, which we've just been reading, right?
Und die Erschütterung der Erde ist ja markiert auch in Matthäus.
No, it's marked in this quote. It's what she says, right? Matthew, Mark and Luke, right?
Ja, also was sie sagt, dass es eben auch in Matthäus, Markus und Lukas ist.
Yeah, what's written in the quote.
Und da steht eben im Zitat.
Okay, so that's what we were looking at here, right? We were looking at from Matthew 24 from verse 3 all the way down to verse 14, because it says, then shall the end come, right?
Wir haben uns in Matthäus 24 von Vers 3 angeschaut bis Vers 14 und dann kommt eben das Ende.
Okay, so where do we go now, right? So many places, right? Just hold your place there. Go to Revelation 16, which is dealing with the 7 last plagues, right?
Wir halten uns den Platz hier und gehen zur Offenbarung 16. Es handelt ja um diese 7 letzten Plagen.
And let's read verse 17.
In Vers 17.
And this is speaking about the 7th plague, right?
Und er spricht jetzt für die 7. Plage.
And the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, it is done. And there were voices and thunders and lightnings. There was a great earthquake, such as was not since were men upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. And men blasphemed God because the plague of the hail, for the plague thereof was exceeding great. Okay? So this is the shaking of the heavens and the earth, right?
Also das ist die Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde.
Now it doesn't say shaking of the heavens and the earth there, but we know when you go to read the 7th plague, when he says it is done, the heavens and the earth shake, right?
Und es erwähnt jetzt nicht, dass das eben die Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde ist, aber wenn wir eben uns das eben alles lesen über die 7. Plage, dann ist es eben am Ende, wo Himmel und Erde erschüttert werden.
And it says there in verse 19, the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, right? So it's just marking the destruction of the cities, right?
Also Vers 19, es markiert diese Zerstörung der Städte.
Okay, so go back to Matthew 24.
Also wir gehen jetzt zurück zu Matthäus 24.
So we've just been looking at that from verses 15 forward is marking in one sense the Sunday law, but in another sense the 7 plagues, right?
Und von Vers 15 und die Verse danach markiert in einem Sinne eben Sonntagsgesetzkrise, aber auch eben die 7 letzten Plagen.
So what we can determine then is that we can take verse 15 and we can place it on top of verses 3 down to 40, right? In a typical sense.
Also was wir dann machen können, ist, wir nehmen eben Vers 15, die Verse danach und können das eben Verse 3 und die Verse danach dann eben platzieren in einem typischen Sinne.
Right? Because verse 15 forward, she's marking it as the Sunday law, but we know it's the 7 last plagues. And she says that Those verses that fulfill in the Sunday law will repeat in the 7 last plagues, right?
Und Vers 15 vorwärts, sie markiert es eben in der Sonntagsgesetzkrise. Wir wissen auch, dass es in den 7 letzten Plagen ist. And
So we know that they will repeat, these verses will repeat in the 7 last plagues, right?
Und wir wissen eben, dass diese Verse sich in den 7 letzten Plagen wiederholen.
But what we're going to do is we're going to take them as a type of the 7 last plagues, and we're going to place them on our line from the Sunday law to the destruction of the cities, right?
Und wir nehmen jetzt diese Verse als einen Typus für die 7 letzten Plagen, platzieren sie eben vom Sonntagsgesetz bis zur Zerstörung der Städte.
Okay, so let's go to verse 15.
Also wir gehen zuerst zu Vers 15.
When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Right? So,
Bis Vers 21.
it begins to break down into different portions. Right?
Und es fängt dann eben an, das in verschiedene Portionen zu zerteilen.
So from the verse 15 when you flee to verse 20 is the first portion.
Also von Vers 15 bis Vers, also wo du fließt, bis Vers 20 ist dieser erste Teil.
So before verse 20 comes, you must have fled, because when verse 20 comes, it's too late to flee, right?
Also du musst eben geflohen sein, bevor eben Vers 20 kommt, denn dann ist es zu spät.
Right? Because when verse 20 comes, verse 21 says, For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor shall ever shall be.
Vers 21.
Right? So when we come to our line here, right?
Und wenn wir zu unserer Linie herkommen,
You have to flee,
dann musst du fliehen.
and we'll just take this center way mark, right? That marks great tribulation.
Und das markiert dann ab dieser mittleren Wegmarke die große Drangsal.
In fact, I can't do it that way. I've not got enough room to illustrate all these things, but I'll just put it in here. Great tribulation. Right, we already understand. This is the same pattern that we've been using, right?
Also hier ist die große Drangsal. Das verstehen wir schon alles, dasselbe Muster.
Okay, this is the beginning where the midnight cry begins to go forward, right?
Also das ist der Anfang, wo der Mitternachtsruf anfängt vorwärts zu gehen.
Marked by Mordecai, right?
Markiert durch Mordechai.
Gives a loud and bitter cry, right?
Macht diesen lauten und bitteren Ruf.
Okay, so back to verse 21.
Zurück zu Vers 21.
For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be what? Shortened, right? So it brings us to this point, which is marking the 7th plague, right? Where he says, it is done, right?
Vers 22 bringen wir uns dann eben zu diesem Punkt, Anfang der 7. Plage, wo er ihm sagt, es ist getan.
It gets cut short, right?
Es wird verkürzt.
Everybody follow? Yes.
Kann jeder folgen?
Okay. So, except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be shortened. Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not, for there shall arise false Christs and false prophets. And it's talking about this time period of the Great Tribulation, these false prophets arise, right?
Also es spricht über diese Zeit der großen Drangsal, wo die falschen Propheten aufstehen.
And shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Verse 29.
Vers 29.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven. What do we have here?
Was haben wir hier?
Shaking of the heavens, right?
Die Erschütterung der Himmel.
So the shaking of the heavens and the earth, right?
Also die Erschütterung der Himmel und Erde.
Because we just read on, it says, stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Okay? So, we know right here when he says it is done, the heavens and earth shake.
Also wir wissen, wenn hier sagt, es ist getan, Himmel und Erde werden erschüttert.
And that's where the special resurrection takes place. They see the sign of the Son of Man, and all the cities begin to get broken down all the way up until he comes, and then there's this great calamity where everything's destroyed, right?
Das ist dann diese besondere Auferstehung eben da.
It's progressive until he comes where everything's destroyed.
Und Sie sehen eben dieses Zeichen des Menschensohnes und dann findet eben diese progressive Zerstörung statt bis zum Ende, wo dann alles zerstört wird.
Right? Okay. These are all things that we've been going through a lot, right? So, okay, go back to the quotes. Oh no, sorry, go back to Matthew 24, excuse me.
Wir gehen zurück zu Matthäus 24,
Verse 30.
in Vers 30.
And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. They shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Okay, so he comes with clouds right there, right? This is where we read the skies, the clouds are drawn back, the voice of God says it is done, and the holy city begins to descend, right?
Also kommt hier auf den Wolken und dass eben diese Wolken geteilt werden und diese Stimme Gottes kommt und diese heilige Stadt, sie fährt dann eben auf.
And he shall send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four corners of the winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So, when he says it's done here, what's now taking place?
Und wenn sagt, es ist getan, was findet nun statt?
A gathering, right? It is the harvest, I'm not denying that, but it's a gathering, right?
Also ein Sammeln findet statt.
Okay. Verse 32.
Vers 31.
Okay, we're not going to deal with that part, right? Because it's brought us right down to the end now, right? But go back in Matthew 24.
Also wir gehen zurück zu Matthäus 24.
In fact, what we'll do, we'll just keep your place there. Go to Luke 21. It describes it clearer. It helps us easier to see it.
Also wir gehen zu Lukas 21. Können wir das klarer sehen?
If you go to verse 9.
Und zu Vers 9.
It says, But when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. So where would we place that?
Also wo würden wir das platzieren?
That's the Sunday law, right? The end is not yet, right?
Heißt das Sonntagsgesetz, also das Ende ist noch nicht gekommen.
Then said he unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines, and pestilence, and fearful sights, and great signs there shall be from heaven. So verses 10 and 11, what's it speaking about?
Also Vers 10 und 11, über was spricht das?
Shaking of the heavens and the earth, right?
Über die Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde.
But verse 12 says, But before all these, before all what?
Also Vers 12, vor diesem allem, also vor was?
Shaking of the heavens and the earth, right?
Also vor der Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde.
Before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And it shall turn to you for a testimony. Settle it therefore in your hearts not to meditate before what ye shall answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. And that begins when the Great Tribulation happens, right?
Und das beginnt eben, wenn die große Drangsal kommt.
And it's a progressive point down here till you're standing here and you give what? Right there.
Es ist progressiv bis zu diesem Punkt, wo du dann stehst und was gibst.
Yes, which is a prediction, right?
Also die letzte Warnungsbotschaft, die Vorhersage.
Okay. It says, and ye shall be betrayed by both parents and brethren and kinsfolk and friends, and some of you they shall cause to be put to death, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but there shall not a hair of your head perish. Because it's speaking about the fiery furnace, right?
Und es spricht über diesen Feuerofen.
Yes.
In your presence possess ye your souls. What did I say? Oh, excuse me. In your patience possess ye your souls, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation there was nigh. So it takes you back, it takes you to this point now that's marking where the 7 last plagues are going to be poured out, right?
Und Vers 20, es bringt dich eben zu diesem Punkt, der eben markiert, dass die 7 Plagen nun ausgegossen werden.
Because verse 19 brings you up to the very end, right?
Denn Vers 19 bringt dich ja zum Ende.
Okay, and verse 20 is the 7 last plagues,
Und Vers 20 ist dann die 7 letzten Plagen,
which is prefigured in the Sunday law, right?
was vorausgeschattet ist im Sonntagsgesetz.
So it would take you here right up to this point, right?
Also es wird dich dann bis zu diesem Punkt bringen.
By 9/11, where he comes, right, and smashes everything, right?
Markiert durch den 11. September, wo kommt und alles eben zerstört.
But it's also marking the point where the 7 last plagues would now be poured out, right?
Aber es markiert auch den Punkt, wo nun die 7 letzten Plagen ausgegossen werden.
Everybody follow what I'm saying, right? So you've got the 7 plagues here, brings you to the point at the end, but in another sense, it's marking now the 7 last plagues begin, right?
Also wir haben
If you follow it in a chronology, right?
in einem Sinne diese 7 letzten Plagen hier, es bringt dich zum Ende, aber dann auch in einer anderen Darstellung eben diese 7 letzten Plagen, die dann anfangen. Und das eben, wenn man das in der Chronologie jetzt sich das anschaut.
Right. This is nothing new that we're teaching. This is all we're just reminding us, putting in place the things what we've understood, right?
Und das ist ja alles nichts Neues, was wir uns da anschauen, sondern wir erinnern uns nur an diese Dinge und platzieren sie.
Okay, so just go back to CET 111 and go to the second paragraph.
Also wir gehen zurück zum 3. Zitat, CET.
It says, dark, heavy clouds came up and clashed against each other. The atmosphere parted and rolled back. Then we could look up through the open space in Orion, whence came the voice of God. The holy city will come down through that open space. I saw that the powers of earth are now being shaken, and that events come in order. Wars and rumours of war, sword, famine, pestilence are the first to shake the powers of the earth. Then the voice of God will shake the sun, the moon, and the stars, and this earth also. I saw that the shaking of the powers in Europe is not, as some teach, the shaking of the powers of heaven, but it's the shaking of the angry nations. Right? So, when we understand this now, the shaking of the powers of the earth begin the Sunday law, right?
Also diese Erschütterung der Mächte der Erde, das beginnt im Sonntagsgesetz.
And the shaking of the powers of the heavens marks something that happens at the end, right?
Und die Erschütterung der Mächte des Himmels markiert etwas am Ende.
This here, right?
Also das hier.
Yes? Now, the reason why I'm going here is because I know, because before we correctly understood this, we used to mark the shaking of the earth, the shaking of the heavens, the earth, as the 2 times of trouble, right? Within the Sunday law.
Und bevor wir das eben richtig verstanden haben, da haben wir eben diese Erschütterung der Erde Die Erschütterung der Himmel und Erde als diese zwei Zeiten der Trübsal markiert im Sonntagsgesetz.
Okay, and we'll just confirm that thought in a moment, right?
Und
So,
wir werden das gleich bestätigen.
but you can see that the shaking of the earth brings you all the way down, right? All the way down to the basically the end of the Sunday law, but it's right here at the end where the heavens and earth are shaken, right?
Und die Erschütterung der Erde, es springt durch all den Weg eben herab, ja fast eben bis zum Ende. Nur hier ist dann eben noch diese Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde.
Okay, so I'm not sure that you're repeating exactly what I want to portray, so maybe I'll do that. The point I'm making is that the shaking of the earth is the Sunday law, right?
Also die Erschütterung der Erde ist das Sonntagsgesetz.
So it's the whole period.
Also es ist die ganze Zeit.
It's followed by the 7 last plagues, right?
Und das ist eben gefolgt von den 7 letzten Plagen.
And it's not until you get to the 7th plague that you have the shaking of the heavens and the earth.
Und es ist eben nicht, bis man zur 7. Plage kommt, wo man dann die Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde hat.
So it's way near the end when Christ is now seen coming on the clouds, right?
Also es ist bis ganz zum Ende, bis dann eben, wo Christus gesehen wird, wie er auf den Wolken kommt.
So when you take the 7 plagues and you place it on top of the Sunday law, it's marked and you have the shaking of the heavens and the earth right at the end of the Sunday law, right?
Aber wenn wir jetzt die 7 letzten Plagen eben nehmen und sie platzieren in der Sonntagsgesetzkrise, haben wir eben diese Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde eben hier.
So the point I'm making is I am correcting a thought that was originally put in a couple of years ago now, that the shaking of the earth and the shaking of the heavens and the earth represent these 2 times of trouble. That would be incorrect, right?
Und ich korrigiere eben diesen Gedanken, der schon viele Jahre zuvor eben reingebracht wurde, dass diese Erschütterung der Erde und der Himmel und der Erde eben diese 2 Zeiten eben markiert. Und das wäre eben inkorrekt.
Just based upon this information, right?
Also jetzt nur basierend auf dieser Information.
Okay, there might be other portions of information that would either confirm or uphold what we already know, or confirm what I'm saying or uphold what we already know.
Und da mögen eben auch andere Teile sein, die eben das bestätigen, was ich eben gesagt habe, oder es eben widerlegen.
Okay, you'll see where I'm going in a moment, right? So just go. Okay, we're going to run out of time, but let's go to this last quote, and I'll make the point, and then we can take this back up again tomorrow. Not the last quote, the second to last quote from 1 Testimonies 2:68.
Und wir gehen jetzt zum vorletzten Zitat von 1t 268.
Nicht weiß, okay.
Okay. It says, I was shown the inhabitants of the earth in the utmost confusion. War, bloodshed, privation, want, famine, and pestilence were abroad in the land. As these things surrounded God's people, they began to press together and to cast aside their little difficulties. Self-dignity no longer controlled them, deep humility took its place, suffering, perplexity, and privation caused reason to resume its throne, and the passionate and unreasonable man became sane and acted with discretion and wisdom. My attention was then called from the scene. Okay, just before we read that. So what do we see in the first paragraph? What do we recognize from what we've been studying this morning?
Was erkennen wir da, was wir heute Morgen schon studiert haben?
Shaking of the earth.
Yes.
Right, where do we see the shaking of the earth there?
Die Erschütterung der Erde, wo sehen wir das?
War, bloodshed, privation, want, famine, pestilence. Right, it's all taken from Matthew 24, right?
Also Krieg, Blutvergießen, Entbehrung, Mangel, Hungersnot und Pestilenz. Das ist alles von Matthäus 24 entnommen.
Okay, so that's the Sunday law, right?
Also das ist das
It's
Sonntagsgesetz.
the whole Sunday law crisis, right?
Das ist die ganze Sonntagsgesetzkrise.
Okay, so go now to the next paragraph.
Zum nächsten Paragraphen.
My attention was then called from the scene. There seemed to be a little time of peace. Once more the inhabitants of the earth were presented before me, and again everything was in the utmost confusion. Strife, war and bloodshed, with famine and pestilence, raged everywhere. Other nations were engaged in this war and confusion. war caused famine, want and bloodshed caused pestilence. And then men's hearts failed them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. Now where's that last sentence taken from?
Also von wo ist dieser letzte Satz entnommen?
Luke 21. Go to Luke 21.
In Lukas 21, wir gehen da auch hin.
Verse 25.
In Vers 25.
It says, there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. What sign is that?
Welches Zeichen ist das?
It's the shaking of the heavens and the earth.
Die Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde.
Men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Right? So, the second paragraph in 1 Testimonies 2:68, which time period is it referring to?
Und der zweite Paragraph in 1t 268, auf was bezieht sich das?
Yes, it's the shaking of the heavens and earth, that's for sure, but
Erschütterung der
what
Himmel und
that's
der
not what I'm asking. No, where have we been placing the shaking of the heavens and the earth? We've either been placing it, it's either in the 7 last plagues at the 7th plague, or it's at the end of the Sunday law, right?
Also wir platzieren das entweder in den 7 letzten Plagen, in der 7. Plage dann, oder am Ende der Sonntagsgesetzkrise.
Okay, so you see, I have some problems because the first paragraph, this would be the shaking of earth. It takes us all the way to the end of the Sunday law, right? And I'll just prove this point to you. Just keep your place in Luke 21, just in case we need to come back there. Go to Revelation 11.
Und dieser erste Paragraph, also Erschütterung der Erde, das findet eben in der Sonntagsgesetzkrise statt bis zum Ende. Wir gehen jetzt zu Offenbarung 11.
And this is the reason why we're looking at this, because I want to go back and I want to bring all the evidence together, right?
Und das ist der Grund, warum wir uns das auch anschauen, denn ich möchte eben zurückgehen und all diese Beweise zusammenbringen.
So go to verse 18.
Zu Vers 18.
It says, the nations were angry and thy wrath is come. So where does God's wrath come?
Also wo kommt Gottes Zorn?
The end of the 7th plague, right?
Also am Ende der 7. Plage.
And I just show this point to you. Go, just turn from Revelation 11 to Revelation 14.
Und wir gehen jetzt schnell zu Offenbarung 14,
And go to verse 15.
zu Vers 15.
This is the harvest, right?
Und das spricht jetzt von der Ernte.
It says, and another angel came out of the heaven, crying with a loud voice to him that sat in a cloud, thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. That's here, right? Beginning of the 7th plague, right?
Also das ist hier am Anfang der 7. Plage.
Verse 17.
Vers 17.
And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle, and another angel came out from the altar which hath power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for their grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. Amen?
Yes.
It's at the end.
Yes.
Right? It's when he comes, it's when he lays all those cities low. Right?
Also das ist am Ende, wenn er kommt und all die Städte eben niedrig macht.
But just go to chapter 15, verse 1.
Und jetzt gehen wir zu Kapitel 15 und Vers 1.
And I saw another sign of heaven, in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God.
Yes.
So it's the end, but it's also the beginning, right?
Also es ist das Ende, aber auch der Anfang.
Everybody see that?
Yes.
Go back to Revelation 11.
Zurück zur Offenbarung 11.
So you can see that it's the end of the 7th plague, but it's also the beginning where the 7 plagues are poured out. It's just a confirmation, right?
Also wir können sehen, es ist das Ende der 7. Plage, aber auch der Anfang, wo die 7 letzten Plagen ausgegossen werden.
Okay,
Also es ist eine Bestätigung.
so back to Revelation 11, verse 18.
Zurück zur Offenbarung 11 und Vers 18.
And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come. So, nations, so this is the angry nations, right?
Also die Nationen waren zornig, also das sind die zornigen Nationen.
Wrath. It's the end of the 7th plague, beginning of the 7 plagues, right?
Dann ist eben dieser Zorn da, also das Ende der 7. Plage und der Anfang der 7 Plagen.
The nations were angry, thy wrath is come, the time of the dead that they should be judged, and thou should give reward unto thy servants the prophets. Christ comes and brings his reward. And this is where he pours out, fills you with his spirit, or you receive the wrath, right?
Und Christus kommt eben und gibt dir dann deinen Lohn. Entweder du wirst eben gefüllt mit dem Geist oder du erhältst den Zorn.
And should give reward unto thy servants, the prophets, to the saints, and to them that fear thy name, small and great, and thou shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth. Okay, so last thoughts, right?
Letzter Gedanke.
Because when there's no real conclusions here, I'm leaving a thought which we will bring up again tomorrow.
Das sind jetzt keine richtigen Schlussfolgerungen, sondern ich hinterlasse jetzt einfach diesen Gedanken und wir schauen uns das morgen dann noch weiter an.
So when you go back to 1 Thessalonians 2:68,
Wenn wir zurückgehen zu 1t 268,
if you were to just take this quote based upon all the evidence that we went through this morning,
also wenn wir jetzt nur dieses Zitat nehmen, basierend auf all den Beweisen von heute Morgen,
the first paragraph would take you to the end of the Sunday law, right?
der erste Paragraph würde dich zum Ende des Sonntagsgesetzes bringen.
Then she says there's a little time of peace, right?
Und sie sagt, dann ist es eine kleine Zeit des Friedens.
But then it says, my attention was then called from the scene. There seemed to be a little time of peace. Once more the inhabitants of the earth were presented before me, and again everything was in the utmost confusion. Strife, war, bloodshed, with famine and pestilence raged everywhere. Other nations were engaged in this war and confusion. War caused famine, war and bloodshed caused pestilence, and then men's hearts failed them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. Right? So, when you ended the little time of peace, you have the shaking of the heavens and the earth, right?
Also am Ende der kleinen Zeit des Friedens hat man dann die Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde.
Okay, so this is where the dilemma. How do we now understand this, right? How can we show that this second paragraph now is representing this would be the second Sunday law? Because if you just take the Reform line, first Sunday law followed by second Sunday law, right?
Und die Frage ist eben, wie wir nun diesen
Here,
zweiten
first Sunday law, second Sunday law. That would be the perfect fulfillment, right?
Die Frage ist eben, wie wir jetzt diesen zweiten Paragraphen eben mit dieser Erschütterung der Himmel und Erde eben in Verbindung bringen können. Und das sind ja diese 2 Sonntagsgesetze, also perfekt hier.
Okay. Question, you got all sorts of thoughts going on in your mind? If not, you should have. I mean, I have many questions from that, right? But we've got other evidences that will bring in, that will help us to understand this. That's why we're going through it, right?
Also wir sollten uns viele Gedanken darüber machen und ich habe aber auch noch andere Beweise, die ich reinbringen werde.
Right? Any last thoughts?
Gibt es noch
Everybody
was?
follow what I was going through this morning?
Konnte jeder folgen?
Okay. So the question we want to now solve is we want to be able to try and understand why is the shaking of the heavens and the earth marking the end of the little time of peace, right?
Die Frage, die wir eben lösen wollen, ist, warum markiert diese Erschütterung der Erde und der Himmel und der Erde eben diese Zeit nach der kleinen Zeit des Friedens?
Okay, because we know it's either at the end of the plagues or the end of the Sunday law, right?
Denn wir haben uns eben angeschaut und wissen eben, dass es am Ende der 7 Plagen ist oder am Ende der Sonntagsgesetzkrise.
Okay, many other things we've got to bring in and we'll try to put these pieces together, right?
Und das sind eben noch viele andere Dinge, die wir reinbringen müssen, um diese Stücke zusammenzubringen.
Okay, let's close with.
Wir schließen ab mit Gebet. Unser himmlischer Vater, ich will dir danken für diesen neuen Morgen und Tag.
Dear Father in heaven, I want to thank you for this new morning and this new day.
Und ich möchte bitten, dass du unsere Schritte führst.
I want to ask that you please guide our steps
Bitte hilf uns zu wandeln, gemäß deinem Wort.
and please help us to walk according to your word.
Und ich möchte auch bitten, dass du uns hilfst, dass wir deinen Charakter und ja, die Linien, wie du bist, besser verstehen.
I also want to ask you that you please help us to understand your character, that is, those lines more fully.
Und hilf uns, dass wir ja, dieses Öl sammeln und das alles studieren.
And please help us together in this oil and to understand all these things.
Und schenke uns diese Sehnsucht danach.
And please also impart to us this desire to seek after those things.
Und wir möchten dich bitten, im Namen Jesu. Amen.
And I want to ask for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.